Rick Walters had lived a quiet life for most of his 56 years. After retiring early from his job as a geologist, he bought a small civic property on the edge of Stone Ridge, a semi-rural neighborhood where deer still wandered across the road and the HOA pretended it was a country club. His land had been carved out of an old ranch decades ago, and it came with a pond spring-fed, deep, and surprisingly useful. It was more than just scenery. It helped with runoff, fed into the water table, and had even been part of a communal irrigation plan back in the 60s. Rick never planned on dealing with neighbor drama again. That was the whole point of moving out here. Fewer people, fewer problems, until Karen Pickering showed up with a shovel. It started at 8:23 a.m. on a Wednesday. Rick had just poured his first cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. That's when he saw her, short, blonde, and dead serious, standing at the far end of his pond with gardening gloves on and a large green plastic tote beside her. She had something metallic jammed into the dirt and was digging like she meant to reach the center of the earth. He called out, trying to keep his tone casual. "Hey there, morning, something I can help you with?" Karen didn't look up right away. When she finally did, she waved as if she belonged there. "Just helping the drainage. Your pond's been seeping too much water into the wildflower beds." Rick blinked. "My pond? What?" Karen motioned with her hand like she was painting a picture only she could see. "I checked the survey markers. Technically, this corner's shared runoff space. I'm just redirecting it a bit so it stops flowing into the commons." Rick stepped off the porch and walked over. He wasn't in the mood to argue, but something about her tone scratched at him. Like she wasn't just adjusting anything, she was interfering. "Karen, I've lived here 6 years. That corner's on my land. And this pond's been here since 1941. She stood up, breathing heavily from the digging. "Well, the HOA said it's ambiguous. Look, it's not a big deal. I'm just rerouting, overflow, a little gravel, a pipe, and your problem's solved." "My problem?" Rick asked. Karen smiled, brushing dirt off her knee. "You'll thank me. This water's going to make someone's crawlspace collapse if it keeps flooding the edge line." With that, she dropped a short section of white PVC pipe into the trench and packed the dirt down. Rick stood still, watching. He wanted to stop her, but he didn't want to create a scene. Not yet. He figured she was bluffing, that she'd get tired, move on, and be back to yelling about mailbox paint by the weekend. But that evening, as Rick grilled chicken on the deck, he noticed something odd. The usual gurgle of water trickling from the pond's back end where it quietly drained into the hidden underground channel was silent. No sound, no motion. He walked down with a flashlight and shined it toward the runoff outlet. It looked blocked, stuffed with something. He leaned closer. A fresh concrete lip had been slathered around the pipe. Still damp, still curing. Rick stood there. For a long time, the air smelled like wet cement and ozone. Something about it felt off. Purposeful. That wasn't a landscaping fix. Someone had sealed the flow. That night, the pressure in Rick's kitchen sink began to flicker. At first it was a minor thing, just a sputter, but by morning, the water had stopped altogether. He checked the lines, the breaker, the pump switch. Everything was in working order. The problem wasn't inside the house. It was somewhere beneath it. Deeper. Rick picked up his phone, stared at it, and didn't dial. Not yet. Instead, he looked out at the pond, calm and still. And for the first time since moving to Stone Ridge, he felt something heavy settle into his chest. Something wasn't right. And he had a strong feeling it had just started. If you've ever had a neighbor make a mess they refuse to admit, leave a comment below. Stories like this need to be told, and you might be next if you're not watching closely. By sunrise, Rick stood at the edge of the pond with his sleeves rolled up and boots covered in morning dew. The birds were chirping like nothing had happened, but the silence coming from the back end of the pond said otherwise. No bubbling, no gentle overflow, no familiar whisper of water slipping beneath the earth. The outlet pipe was dead quiet. He crouched down and tapped the pipe's side. Solid. Then he scraped at the concrete ring that had been slapped on its mouth, still soft in places. Fresh. He didn't need to be a geologist to know something vital had been plugged, and if Karen's pipe was rerouting anything, it wasn't just excess water, it was cutting off the underground flow entirely. Rick walked to the pump house. He opened the door and looked over his system. Nothing had blown. No leaks. Pressure gauge, barely moving. He turned the kitchen sink on again. Not even a sputter. He poured what little bottled water he had into the coffee maker and sat on the porch. That's when the first text came in. "Hey, Rick. Your water out too. Carl, 2 houses down. He texted back, yeah, since last night another message chimed in, then another. 5 houses within a quarter mile were suddenly without water. Rick stared out at the horizon, then turned slowly to look at his quiet, unmoving pond. He remembered something. When he first bought the place, the inspector mentioned the property was built over an old water channel. Decades ago, before the subdivision was even mapped out, an underground branch from the spring pond had been used to feed water to nearby lots. Not official infrastructure, but old ranchland ingenuity. It wasn't marked on any modern plans, but Rick had the notes. He ran inside, opened the drawer, and pulled out the original survey packet. Inside was a folded, faded page showing a gray scribble labeled Historic Feeder Conduit. The thin line ran from the pond's south edge and passed beneath 8 different properties. Right through Karen's backyard. Rick called Tucker. Tucker Morales ran a mechanic shop in town, but he had a side hobby for solving strange homeowner problems. He was the type of guy who owned gadgets he didn't need just in case one day he did. You're telling me the water for half your neighbors used to come from your pond? Tucker asked, after hearing the story. Used to, Rick said, until someone poured quickset cement into the main drain. Tucker whistled. That's not a landscaping, oops. That's a full-on felony with plumbing flavor. They met at the pond an hour later. Tucker brought along a coil of camera snake, the kind he used for car inspections, and a portable screen. They fed the line into the overflow pipe. For 20 feet, it was normal cobwebs, algae, some rust. Then came a solid shape, gray, textured, jagged. A wall, cement, Rick muttered. Karen sealed it shut. Tucker leaned in. Who does that to a pond? Someone who thinks they're the boss of the water, Rick said. It wasn't just Rick's land she defected. It was the whole neighborhood, and Karen without permits. Without surveying had poured concrete into what might have been the only thing keeping the homes around her hydrated. They pulled the camera out and cleaned the lens. We need proof, Tucker said, because no one's gonna believe the HOA princess ruined everybody's water. Rick stood there, staring at the calm surface of the pond. It's not just sabotage, he said. It's theft. She stole our access. That night, Rick walked past Karen's house. She was hosting her usual Thursday evening book club. Laughter spilled off the porch. She held a glass of wine and waved at him as if nothing had happened. But he noticed something. The sprinklers on her lawn weren't running. She was hand-watering her flower bed with jugs of store-bought water. It hit him then Karen knew exactly what she'd done. She wasn't just fixing a problem. She was covering up her mistake. And Rick wasn't going to let it slide. If you've ever had a neighbor mess up and pretend it was your fault, leave a comment below. Stick around because this mess is just getting started. By morning, the neighborhood message thread was on fire. Rick's phone buzzed every few minutes. Still no water. City says it's not on their end. We have kids. This can't go on another day. Rick hadn't responded to anyone, yet. He wasn't ready to start making claims without proof, but he knew what was coming. The moment people realized the outage was radiating from his land, the target would shift, so he got ahead of it. He uploaded 3 stills from Tucker's camera probe the cement blockage, time-stamped, complete with location markers. No commentary, no accusations. Just images. Within 20 minutes, comments exploded. Is that what's under the pond? Is that why Karen was digging back there? Who poured cement into an active drain? The images did what Rick hoped they would do. They sparked curiosity, not blame. Meanwhile, Tucker was already driving into town to grab a few more tools, a long bore scope, water testing strips, and a new pair of gloves. We're doing this properly, he said on the phone. No accusations without science. By noon, Rick and Tucker were back at the pond. They expanded the search, lowering the camera down a second pipe on the opposite side of the pond. Hoping to trace how far the cement went, they hit blockage again nearly 5 feet down. This wasn't just a surface patch. The entire lower channel had been filled. You realize how insane this is. Tucker muttered. She didn't fix a leak, she plugged a major underground artery. They laid out a printout of the old waterway sketch and highlighted where the pond's feeder line used to split. It wasn't just decorative runoff. It was a historical water source that had quietly fed the groundwater wells for the surrounding homes. Rick stared at the lines for a long moment. If this is all connected like I think it is. Then her concrete cap cut off the recharge zone. Tucker sat back. That would explain the dry pumps. The pond's not pushing water into the old conduit anymore. The soil's drying out. Rick nodded slowly. She didn't kill a pipe. She starved the aquifer. The theory made sense, but proving it would take more. They began testing water levels in the soil. Just half an inch below the surface, the clay was bone dry. Even during drought years, it never dropped that fast. They flagged the spots and took photos. Then came the call. It was Brenda McAllister 2 streets down, retired, and the kind of neighbor who tracked everything. "You won't believe this," she said. "The HOA just sent a message blaming the outage on failing residential plumbing. They're asking everyone to check internal lines and conserve." Rick rubbed his forehead. "They're trying to bury it. They're trying to bury you," she added. "They're blaming the pond." Karen was on the board. It all made sense now. The silence, the Facebook comments, the quiet hand watering at night. She knew she'd messed up and now, she was scrambling to control the narrative. Tucker leaned over. "We post everything tonight. Full diagram, photos, water data, camera footage." Rick wasn't sure yet. He needed more. Something she couldn't spin. Something they couldn't deny. He walked down to the back of the pond and followed the tree line until it curved into Karen's property. The grass changed, they're less green, more cracked. Her flower beds, once pristine, looked tired. That's when he noticed it. A PVC pipe poking out of the dirt, running toward the street. Unmarked, improvised, it connected to nothing. It was Karen's pipe, the one she claimed would help with runoff, except it didn't run anywhere. It had no outflow. Rick squatted beside it and tapped. Hollow, dead air. She hadn't rerouted anything, she'd just stopped it. A few feet away, he spotted 2 empty bags of fast-drying concrete stuffed behind her compost bin. She never expected anyone to look that closely. Rick stood up, phone in hand, camera rolling. This wasn't an accident, and it was time the entire neighborhood saw what she'd done. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe, because what happens next turns this HOA squabble into something much bigger. And someone's about to get exposed. The HOA meeting was set for Saturday morning at the community club hosts a stucco structure that smelled faintly of carpet glue and stale coffee. Rick wasn't technically a voting member. His property fell just outside the original HOA plat line, but Karen had looped him into their business the moment she tampered with the pond. He arrived early. Tucker came along with a duffel bag full of exhibits, photos, diagrams, soil test printouts, even a thumb drive with the probe footage. The clubhouse slowly filled. Retirees, dog walkers, and concerned parents sat in folding chairs. At the head of the room stood Karen, clipboard in hand, trying to look unbothered. She wore a beige sweater set and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning," she chirped, tapping the mic. "Before we begin, let's address the water pressure situation." She cleared her throat. "The board has concluded that recent plumbing issues are likely the result of aging infrastructure and unusually low soil saturation. We're encouraging all residents to inspect their private lines and limit outdoor watering until further notice." Rick raised his hand. She ignored it. He stood up anyway. Funny how soil saturation dropped exactly when someone filled in the main runoff conduit with cement. The room went quiet. Karen's smile flickered. "Mr. Walters, as I've explained, your pond is a non-regulated water feature. Any assumptions about its influence on neighborhood plumbing are purely speculative." Tucker stood up and opened the duffel bag. "We brought speculation. In color." He walked to the front and laid out a series of laminated images, concrete blockage from the camera snake, time-stamped footage, before and after soil moisture readings. Karen frowned. "These could be from anywhere. You have no proof this is even my property." Rick stepped forward and handed her a photo taken just 2 days ago. It showed the PVC pipe in her yard, the capped end visible, with a timestamp and GPS metadata. In the corner, behind the compost bin, were the empty bags of concrete mixed store-bought, labeled and still half-torn. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One man in a baseball cap leaned over to his wife. "Did she really pour cement into the main drain?" Karen's jaw tightened. "I was simply redirecting overflow. That area floods during storms. I was protecting my foundation." Another voice rose from the back. "And the rest of us lose water because of it." Karen stiffened. "I'm not responsible for outdated plumbing." Tucker dropped one final item on the table, a map, the old blueprint of the spring-fed conduit system from the original land documents. The red line ran directly from Rick's pond, through lot, under multiple homes. It's not outdated, Tucker said, it's buried. And it was still functioning until someone buried it deeper. Karen stepped back from the table. Her smile was gone. One board member, a soft-spoken man named James, cleared his throat. Karen, did you file a permit for any drainage work? I didn't need one, she snapped. It was on my property. Rick raised an eyebrow. Then why'd you do it behind your compost bin? Silence. More neighbors stood up. Questions flew. People were angry. This wasn't just about water anymore. It was about trust. Karen held up her hands. This meeting is getting out of control. I'm not on trial here. Rick turned to the crowd. Then let's take it outside. You can all come to my pond. You can see what's been done. And you can decide for yourselves. The room buzzed. Several nodded. Karen gathered her papers, face tight. You'll regret this, she muttered, as she brushed past Rick. He didn't respond, because something had changed. Karen was no longer running the story, and the truth was about to overflow. If you're still watching, stick around. Because next comes the sheriff, the basement flood, and the part Karen didn't see coming. Rick didn't like making enemies, he never had, but he'd also never seen a neighbor do something that reckless and act like the victim when caught. That night, after the meeting, he sat on the porch with Tucker and scrolled through the Facebook page. Karen had posted a 3-paragraph rant blaming online bullies, illegal surveillance, and misinformation spread by unregulated property owners. There were no names, but everyone knew who she meant. Tucker shook his head. She's going all in. Doesn't matter that we've got proof. She's hoping noise drowns out facts. Rick nodded. Might be time to bring in someone who doesn't listen to HOA excuses. The next morning, he called the sheriff's office. Officer Daniels answered. Rick had met him once before, during a fence dispute a couple years back. Daniels wasn't one for small talk. He listened, asked a few follow-ups, then agreed to come by noon. Daniels pulled into Rick's gravel driveway. He was tall, mid-40s, with a look that said he didn't tolerate nonsense even before coffee. Rick laid everything out. The water outage, the blocked conduit, the video footage, the photos from Karen's yard. Daniels asked to see the pond, then walked the perimeter in silence. When they reached the back, Rick pointed to the PVC pipe sticking out behind the compost bin. Daniels knelt down and examined it, then looked at the concrete bags still sitting off to the side. He asked if Karen had admitted to installing the pipe. Rick recounted her statements at the HOA meeting. Daniels took notes. Then he asked the most important question. You mind if I talk to her directly? Rick nodded. Please do. Daniels drove the quarter-mile down the lane to Karen's house. Rick didn't follow. He wanted her to deal with this without an audience. But Tucker, who had parked nearby, couldn't resist watching from across the street. Karen opened the door in full denial mode. Tucker said later that she started smiling, offering coffee, acting like she was the one wronged. But Daniels didn't budge. He asked to see the shovel she'd used for her drainage project. She hesitated, said it was lost. He asked again. She caved. The shovel was in her garage. It was still crusted with dry gray powder. Daniels scraped a sample with a pen, knife and bagged it. Then he asked if she had receipts for any of the materials. She said she'd paid cash. Said she wasn't keeping records for personal gardening. Daniels nodded, thanked her for her time, and walked back to his cruiser. Rick was waiting at the pond. She's nervous, Daniels said. Gave just enough answers to keep it civil, but not enough to make sense. I'm filing a report. Civil codes on unpermitted land alteration, possibly environmental tampering. It won't be an arrest, but it's going on paper. Rick exhaled. That's all I need. Later that evening, something else happened, something Karen hadn't planned for. Her yard lights flickered off. A utility truck pulled up. 2 workers stepped out, surveyed the property, and marked a spot on the ground near her curb with bright orange paint. Word got out quickly. The county had received multiple complaints about unregistered landscape changes possibly impacting community resources. An inspection was scheduled. Karen didn't post that night. For the first time in days, her social media feed was quiet. But Rick didn't rest easy. He had a gut feeling. When someone like Karen loses control, they don't back down. They dig in. He stood at the edge of the pond under moonlight and listened. The water was still. The concrete blockage hadn't moved. The land was thirsty, but something else was about to break. It wouldn't be pipes or rules. It would be Karen's grip on the story. And what came next would wash everything clean. If you're still with us, you don't want to miss what happens in the next part, because when the water starts flowing again, it doesn't go where anyone expects, and Karen's house isn't ready for it. The weather was dry, but the ground didn't lie. Rick could feel it underfoot, tight-packed earth, brittle, moisture-starved. The pond looked full on the surface, but it was no longer breathing. That steady cycle, the quiet exhale that once fed the deeper ground, had gone silent. Rick didn't wait for the county. He didn't trust the HOA, and after the sheriff's visit, it was clear Karen wasn't done. So he and Tucker got to work. They marked a line 50 feet from the pond, following the path of the old conduit. According to the sketch in Rick's survey packet, the underground feeder had once run beneath the ridge and split just past Karen's backyard. This is where it used to branch. Rick said, planting a flag. If we can open this, we can bypass whatever she blocked. Tucker dropped a pickaxe into the dirt. Let's find the ghost vein. The digging wasn't easy. The sun beat down, and the soil fought them with every inch. After 2 hours, they hit clay, then shale, then something different. Tucker paused and jabbed the spade again. A hollow sound echoed. Rick knelt down and brushed away the dust. A worn-out pipe cap, rusted and fused with dirt, appeared. They tapped on it and felt the vibration carry. This is it, Rick said. The bypass. They cleared space around the pipe and installed a relief valve, something Tucker had rigged from leftover plumbing parts. The moment they turned it, a low groan came from the earth. Then, water, just a trickle at first, then more, cold, clear, and moving. It wasn't explosive, it didn't shoot out like a fountain, but it surged with steady pressure. The trench filled slowly, soaking the clay, creeping into the dry cracks around them. Rick stood back and watched the mud form. You feel that? Tucker asked. That's the land exhaling. They ran temporary tubing down the channel and created a bypass flow. Within 4 hours, the first house at the edge of the loop reported water pressure returning. The texts poured in. My faucets just turned on. Laundry's running. Whatever you did, thank you. Rick didn't post anything. He didn't need to. Word of mouth spread faster than screenshots. But not everyone was celebrating. Karen's house was quiet. No lights on, no posts, no cars out front. Then came the call. It was Brenda again, the unofficial neighborhood watch captain. You should come see this, she said. Karen's front yard just started flooding. Rick and Tucker drove down. A small crowd had already gathered, neighbors standing on sidewalks, watching from behind, arms folded across their chests. Water was bubbling out of Karen's lawn. Not fast, just a slow, murky seepage that oozed up near the base of her porch steps. Rick stayed back, watching. Tucker pointed. That's backflow. She sealed the original outlet too tight. Now it's looking for a new way out. Someone knocked on Karen's door. No answer, then a creak. The garage door opened just a foot before stopping. Karen ducked out, barefoot, holding a half-packed duffel bag. She didn't look angry, she looked tired. Don't film me, she muttered as a neighbor lifted a phone. It's under control. But at WASN, single quotes tea water kept pooling. The flower beds tilted. The yard lights flickered as underground cables shorted. The homemade blockage she installed had backfired literally. Instead of protecting her home from runoff, she'd created a sealed pressure pocket. The redirected flow found the weakest exit, straight into her foundation. That night, she finally made a post. Not a rant, no passive-aggressive jabs, just for words. Hiring contractors, emergency repair. Rick didn't comment. He didn't smile. He just walked back to his own land, where the pond now shimmered again, alive and moving. The fight wasn't over, but nature had finally started to push back. If you've followed the story this far, don't look away now. What happens next flips everything upside down, and someone's about to lose more than just their waterline. The next morning, Rick stepped out with his coffee and watched a thin line of steam rise off the pond. The surface moved again. Not much, but enough to carry a ripple across the edge. Water was flowing. The land was breathing. The bypass line he and Tucker had rigged was holding. Most homes had water back. The pressure wasn't perfect, but it was better than silence. Neighbors waved now when they saw Rick, some nodding, others stopping their cars just to say thanks. But things weren't calm everywhere. Karen's house, once the most immaculately manicured lot on the street, looked like it had been dragged through a swamp. Her lawn was soggy, flower beds ripped apart. A sump pump groaned in the background, pushing water from her flooded crawlspace to the edge of the street, where it pooled into the gutter. Plastic sheeting covered the windows. A blue contractor truck sat in the driveway. The HOA logo had been scraped off Karen's mailbox overnight. No one claimed responsibility, but no one was exactly outraged either. The HOA board called another emergency meeting. This one was closed to the public, or at least, that's what they thought. Tucker, of course, showed up anyway. Not to crash it, but to park across the street with a long lens camera aimed at the open clubhouse window. Rick waited down the block, reading the live updates. Tucker texted him from inside his truck. Karen just walked in. No smile. Board looks uncomfortable. James is speaking now, reading from a folder. Then another text. Oh man. She's yelling now. Inside, the HOA president James was laying out a timeline of events, including the utility complaints, the sheriff's visit, and the civil infraction report. Karen pushed back, insisting Rick had exaggerated, that the pipe was harmless, and she had acted within her rights. But James had copies of the camera footage. Tucker had sent them. So had Brenda. So had 3 other neighbors, and the biggest blow, a letter from the county water authority confirming that the blockage had disrupted a historic recharge zone 1 that had been unofficially sustaining the neighborhood's shallow wells. It wasn't about intention anymore. It was about result. An hour later, the meeting ended. Karen came out first, walking quickly, eyes fixed ahead. She didn't say a word to anyone, just climbed into her car and pulled away. The rest of the board filed out slowly, some chatting, others avoiding eye contact with the neighbors already gathering nearby. Later that day, a memo was slipped under every front door. It was from the HOA board. A carefully worded letter explaining that Karen Pickering had voluntarily stepped down from her role as vice president, effective immediately. It didn't mention the pond, or the water, or the pipe, but everyone understood why. Rick sat on his porch that evening, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Tucker joined him with a six-pack and dropped into the old wooden chair beside him. So, that's it? Tucker asked. She's off the board. Water's mostly back. Crawlspace disasters on her tab. Rick took a long sip. Feels too quiet. Tucker chuckled. Yeah, Karen quiet is like tornado silence. Makes your ears ring before it all goes sideways again. Rick nodded. She'll make a move. Not publicly, but something. As if summoned by the words, a pickup truck rumbled down the road. It slowed in front of Rick's gate. Inside sat a stranger mid-50s, wearing a polo and holding a folder. The man gave a polite wave and stepped out. Mr. Walters, he asked. Name's Owen Fields. I'm a property assessor with Franklin County. Got a request to reevaluate this parcel. See if any unpermitted modifications have impacted local water structures. Rick frowned. Who filed the request? The man checked his notes. Anonymous, but came through HOA channels. Tucker leaned forward. Well, someone's playing a new angle. Rick sighed. She's not done. The storm wasn't over, it had just shifted shape. Stick around for the final part because when Rick fights back this time, the ending's not what anyone expects. And Karen, she's about to learn what happens when the ground itself turns against you. The county assessor's visit didn't rattle Rick. He expected it. Karen never gave up a fight. She just changed tactics. But what she hadn't counted on was how much the neighborhood had changed. The man in the polo, Owen, was professional, polite, and thorough. He spent 2 hours walking the property, testing runoff points, and comparing modern maps with the old survey Rick had kept from the day he closed on the house. At the pond, Owen crouched and tested flow with a handheld meter. This is good, he said. Better than most recharge zones I've seen. Rick nodded. That's because it hasn't been paved over or poisoned. Owen smiled slightly, then tapped his clipboard. You've done everything right, but I'll be honest, this report's going to disappoint whoever filed it. 2 days later, the letter came in the mail. No violations. No zoning issues. In fact, Owen recommended the area be noted for preservation in future HOA plans. Rick posted the notice to the community board online. No captions, no gloating. Just the truth, printed in black and white. The comments poured in. Justice. Told you he wasn't the problem. Karen should take notes. From nature, but Rick didn't respond. He was already back to work. Not with more digging, that part was done. The land had healed what it could. Instead, he was building something. On the south end of the pond, near the original outlet pipe Karen had sealed, Rick erected 2-cedar posts and a smooth wooden sign between them. Carved carefully by hand, it read, "Where the land gives, take only what you need. Block it and it finds another way." It wasn't flashy, just a reminder, a boundary marker, not just for property, but for ego. That same week, Karen quietly put her house on the market. No announcement, no open house signs. She hired a private agent and requested discreet showings. But word spread. In a town like Stone Ridge, nothing stayed quiet for long. The first potential buyer came and left within 10 minutes. So did the second. Apparently, they noticed the smell, mildew, groundwater rot, the kind that seeps into subflooring and never fully leaves. The crawlspace damage had gotten worse. And Karen, she had started staying at a hotel in town. Some said she was trying to rent out the place until it sold. Others said she was already gone. Rick didn't ask. At the next public HOA meeting, Karen's name wasn't mentioned once. A new vice president had been appointed. James, now acting president, thanked the neighborhood for its resilience and cooperation during the water outage event. No blame, no drama, just a quiet reset. Tucker leaned over to Rick during the meeting and whispered, "You notice they're changing the bylaws next month. New language about tampering with shared natural resources." Rick nodded. Took them long enough. Tucker smiled. "Think she'll watch this from her hotel room?" Rick didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because sometimes, the best win isn't revenge. It's watching nature do what it's always done. Reclaim, recover, and remind. As summer rolled in, the pond looked clearer than ever. Dragonflies hovered over the surface, and frogs returned to the banks. The flow was steady, the soil soft again. The water cooled. Neighbors stopped by more often now, not to complain, but to sit, to chat, to walk the edge of the trail Rick had cut along the pond's southern slope. Kids played near the reeds. Brenda even suggested a small footbridge. Rick was considering it. But the sign stayed. No lights, no fanfare. Just wood, carved words, and a lesson that stuck. And Karen. Well, her house never did sell at full price. Turns out, buyers don't like water when it comes from underneath. If you made it this far, you already know, sometimes nature writes the final chapter. Hit subscribe if you've ever watched someone dig their own hole and fall straight in. And don't miss the next story. Because out here, the real battles don't happen in court. They happen in the dirt.